Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to be reading The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter. It's going to be a fun tale. One morning, Benjamin Bunny, the cousin of Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter, sat on the side of the road. He jerked up his ears and listened to the trip-trop of a pony. A wagon was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best Easter bonnet. As soon as they had passed by, little Benjamin Bunny slid down the side of the bank and into the road, and set off with a hop, skip, and a jump to visit his cousins who lived in the woods behind Mr. McGregor's garden. The woods were full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt, Mrs. Rabbit, and his cousins. Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and gloves, which were sold at the rabbit market. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit spices, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin Bunny did not really want to see his aunt. He just wanted to see his cousin Peter. He came running around the back of the fir tree and nearly tripped over his cousin Peter's ears. Peter was laying in between the roots of the tree. He was sitting by himself, looking rather sick. He was dressed in a red cotton handkerchief thrown over him like a blanket, because he was not wearing any clothes. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "what happened to your clothes? Where are they?" Peter replied, "They are on the scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and he told Benjamin Bunny how he had been chased around the garden by Mr. McGregor and had lost his shoes and his new blue jacket. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and told him that he saw Mr. McGregor go out in the wagon with Mrs. McGregor, probably for the whole day, because she was wearing her best Easter bonnet. "If Mr. McGregor has gone away," Peter said, "this might be a good time to get my clothes from the garden." At this point, Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard from inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail! Cottontail, fetch me some more chamomile tea." Peter didn't want his mother to see him. He said to Benjamin, "Let's go for a walk." So they went off together, hand in hand, and jumped upon the flat top of the stone wall at the bottom of the woods. From here they looked down into Mr. McGregor's garden. They spied Peter's jacket and shoes, still perched on the scarecrow poles, topped with a big old sun hat of Mr. McGregor's. Peter wanted to go under the gate to get into the garden, but little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in the garden is to climb down a pear tree." But when Peter tried to climb down, he slipped and fell head first. He didn't get hurt, however, as the ground below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been covered with lettuce leaves. The rabbits left a great many unusual little footprints all over the bed of lettuce, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clog shoes on his feet. Oh, look at those. Little Benjamin said that the first thing they needed to do was to get back Peter's clothes, and then they could make use of Peter's pocket handkerchief. They took the clothes down from the scarecrow poles. It had been raining during the night. There was water in the shoes, and Peter's jacket had shrunk a little. Benjamin tried on the sun hat, but it was way too big for him. Then Benjamin suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt, Peter's mamma. As they were gathering the onions, Peter kept hearing noises. That worried him. Benjamin, however, was perfectly at home and stuffed his little face with lettuce leaves. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of little Benjamin's papa was Old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were very tasty, and the rabbits loved to eat them. But Peter did not eat anything. He was so worried about being in the garden and the noises he kept hearing. "I'm scared," he said. "I want to go home." He dropped half the onions because he kept looking back over his shoulder and tripping. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables, so he led the way boldly toward the other end of the garden. They went along a little stone walk with planks across it, under a sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorstep, nibbling on cherry stones. They waved to Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin Bunny as they passed by. Benjamin Benny. I suppose that would be a new funny name, wouldn't it? Absent-mindedly, Peter dropped the pocket handkerchief filled with onions completely because he was too busy looking around and worrying about being in the garden. He scurried to pick them up and put them back in the handkerchief. Poor Peter. They walked past the greenhouse where the flower pots sat, with the vegetable frames and the water tubs. Peter still heard noises louder than before. His eyes got as big as lollipops. Whew! Peter was a step or two in front of his cousin when he suddenly stopped. And what do you think those little rabbits saw around the corner of the greenhouse? A big cat sunning herself in the middle of the garden path. Little Benjamin took one look and then, in half a second or less, scurried to hide himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. Oh, my goodness. The cat got up and stretched herself and walked directly over to the basket, sniffing and pawing. She smelled something interesting. Was it rabbit? The smell of the onions was so overpowering that she wasn't sure what she smelled. Just to be sure, she sat down on top of the basket, and there she waited for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket because it was quite dark under there, and because the smell of the onions was dreadful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry big, watery tears. The sun was going down behind the trees in the woods, as it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat on the basket. After a while, there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of slate and stone fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the stone wall. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit spices and had a little stick in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had had dealings with cats before, and he was not afraid of them in the least. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat and skedaddled it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur in the process. The cat was too surprised and caught off guard to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and switched him with the little stick. Next, he took out his nephew Peter. Then he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden with Benjamin and Peter following close behind. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he saw several things which perplexed him. It looked as though someone had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs, only the footprints were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door from the outside. And what happened to the scarecrow's clothes? Oh, my goodness. When Peter got home from being rescued from the cat, his mother forgave him for going into the garden because she was so glad to see that he was safe and had also found his shoes and new blue jacket. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling, with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit spices. Everyone was quite cozy in the rabbit hole, and very thankful that they were all together again. The end. Until we read together again next time, boys and girls. Bye-bye.